Hey everyone. In this video, we'll talk about the method of sealed bids. This method applies often to when you're trying to divide an estate, and that's the example we're going to seize hold of for this particular video. So we're thinking about dividing an estate. And I'm going to take us step by step through this method, and then we will see an example in the next video of sort of how we can determine all of these numbers. All right, so the first step in the method of sealed bids is called bidding. And basically, we have a bunch of individuals, players, that in this case are Beth, James, Nancy, and Peter. And then we have some assets, and the assets are ones that need to be divided up amongst them. And so each individual, let's take Beth, for example, is going to make a bid on what she thinks the various assets are worth. And she'll give an absolute value, an absolute dollar amount for each of the assets that she would be willing to, that she thinks they're valued at. Similarly, James makes his own valuation, and Nancy and Peter do as well. We add up all of these values for each of the individuals, and this is what these numbers here are essentially what these individuals think the total estate is worth. Great. Now, in order to make things fair, we're expecting honesty. We're expecting that each individual really does value that estate at that amount. And then we expect that that individual thinks that they deserve an equal portion of that estate, and so does every other player. So we divide that total value by 4 to get the fair share value. What is the fair share value for each individual? It's down here. And you'll see, of course, these are very different values depending on how the players value the various assets. So that's step 1. What about step 2? Step 2 is allocation. And how do we allocate these assets? Well, we give the asset to the highest bidder. Just like in an auction, you look at the house and you try to find what's the highest bid. The highest bid is James. James bids $450,000 for the house. James has the highest bid. He gets the house. For the car, Peter has the highest bid at $40,000. For the furniture, Beth has the highest bid. And for art, Beth also has the highest bid. Great. So we allocate to these individuals, to these players, those items. And we can see down here in this chart, which I'll explain in a moment, that this is how the items are distributed. And you might say, well, Nancy is getting nothing. That's a problem. But this is a part of the method to deal with that problem. All right, so what is the step 3? Step 3 is called the initial settlement. And we've determined, as a part of finding the initial settlement, we've determined up here the fair share value for each, according to each player. And the idea here is to look at the value received and to ask, well, Beth received only $25,000 worth of items. She received, according to her value system, she received the furniture and the art, and that has a value of $25,000. But a fair share value for Beth, according to her value system, is $115,000. That's her fair share value. And so what needs to happen is we need to make sure that the estate makes up that difference and gives her $90,000. If the estate gives her 90,000, then 90,000 plus the 25,000 will equal exactly her fair share, according to what she's bid. James, on the other hand, received the house. And the house is valued quite highly. So James has received the house at $450,000. His total is $495,000. That's what he values the entire estate at, which divided by 4 is the fair share value, which is 123,750. So James received a lot more value than his fair share. And so what James must then do is he must pay that difference to the estate. So he subtracts the fair share value from the value of the house, and he pays the estate $326,250. Which, according to him, if you think about it, is a great deal for the house because he's not paying that amount. So he's still getting some value there. Now, Nancy is an interesting case. Nancy doesn't have anything. Nothing is given to Nancy at all. And Nancy values the whole estate at $338,000, so not very highly. But that means her fair share value is $84,500. And since she's not receiving anything as far as assets go, she receives from the estate $84,500. She'll receive that amount in cash, which is her fair share from her valuation, her value system of the estate. And then finally, Peter did receive the car valued at $40,000. His fair share is $72,775. And so he will receive the difference, which is $32,775 from the estate. This is our initial settlement. And we take a look at what happens here. So now we're going to flip it and consider what the estate is going through. What happens with the estate? So in this step, we're going to divide the surplus, but we'll also calculate it. So if we imagine what happened here, the estate received from James $326,250. It had to pay out $90,000 to Beth, and it had to pay out $84,500 from Nancy, and it had to pay out $32,775. So if we sort of add and subtract this total, or this amount of dollars, we will end up with a surplus. You can see that James is paying quite a bit, and in fact, he is paying more. There's more money coming to the estate than is actually going out. And there's a simple mathematical reason for that, but I won't get into that here. So there's a surplus to this estate of $118,000, and you just use a calculator for something like this. You can just add and subtract here, and you can see that there's a surplus of exactly $118,975. And the estate doesn't get to go home and spend that money on its own. It has to divide things up equally. So the idea is the estate would then take that surplus and divide it by 4. So surplus division per player will be exactly this divided by 4, which comes to 29,744. So this is equal to the surplus divided by the number of players, 4. Great. So we calculate this number, and the estate, in principle, would return that divided surplus back to all of each and every one of the players, just equally. But we don't need to actually go through this because all of this is sort of on paper, and we can total it up. And so if we want, what we can do is just look at the final settlement. We can say, all right, well, we're going to return $29,744 to the individuals. Right here, we have a bit of an error, to be honest. So let me close that out. And let me write down the actual amounts here. So for the final settlement, what we'll do is we'll take the item received, we'll write this down, and we're going to add whatever has been received from the estate, and we're going to add this surplus to this divided surplus. So we'll look at the items received and the cash, and we'll see how that gets distributed. Let me move this over and give myself a little more room. Okay, so we have Beth, James, Nancy, and Peter. Items received for Beth are the furniture and the car. Okay. For James, he gets the house. Nancy doesn't get anything. Nothing for Nancy as far as assets go. Peter receives the car. And then what about the cash? Well, the estate for Beth gave Beth $90,000. And so we had to add on after the division, the surplus division, another $29,744. And what that ended up giving her is exactly $119,744. James, on the other hand, had to pay $326,250 to the estate, but then was reimbursed a small amount of that, the division surplus. And so we can subtract the division surplus from the amount that he had to pay, and that will mean that he had to, we'll write it in red, pay $296,506. This is in red because that's actually paid to the estate, or owed to the estate. Nancy had $84,000 that she was receiving from this estate, and we can tack on the surplus division. And so Nancy, from a cash perspective, gets $114,244. And similarly, Peter had $32,775. We tack on the surplus division. He will get the car plus $62,519. And so this is the final settlement, and we are done. Everyone goes home, and they all have their fair share. Now, a comment to make about this, which you might observe, is that some people seem to have made out better than others. For example, Beth, she received the furniture and the car and $119,000. Nancy received nothing and $114,000. So received less money and no assets. And you may say, well, that's not fair to Nancy, but there's no objective fair here. All right, there's nothing that's really objectively fair. Nancy valued the estate at a much lower value than Beth did. So Beth, over $100,000 less. So from Nancy's perspective, she did get a fair share because she got more than her fair share value that her value system said the estate was worth. And Beth got a little bit more than her fair share. So a lot of it, if you're ever in the situation where you need to make sealed bids, you really want to value things the way you believe. If you game it low to try to get more cash, for example, you may end up with a lot less in value. All right.